Now we're going to come to the question of the changes in the calendar. We have 3 calendars. We have the St. Pius X revision, which restored Sunday to its prominence, revised the calendar and the Breviary. The main thing is Sunday prior to St. Pius X was only, in fact it's still only a semi-double. But the way it was ranked compared to others, any saint day, which was a double, supplanted Sundays. So often, the priest, instead of coming out in green vestments on like the 5th Sunday after Pentecost, he might come out in white or red for some feast day. Because take a look, I'm just flipping through this. Okay, I have one. This would be possibly an earlier Sunday after Epiphany. If it fell on February 23rd, St. Peter Damian is a double. Doubles supplant semi-doubles. They are a higher rank. Well, Sunday was restored, although it remained a semi-double for technical reasons. It outranked everything except doubles of the 1st and 2nd class. We're talking about feasts like the Assumption, the Annunciation, Feast of St. Joseph. Okay. Which, when they come up on a Sunday, or the Lord's Day, they should be celebrated. Okay, then we have the revision of the calendar, 1955, which I'll come back to. But we'll go to 1960. True, I reject 1960. Many years ago I was doing some research, and I came across a supporting decree to the decree Rubricarum Instructum. Rubricarum Instructum removed some feasts. I'm going to go through that list here in a minute. But it didn't say why. The supporting decree, which applies to particular calendars, for instance, in every diocese you celebrate the patron feast of the cathedral, for instance. And the day of the consecration of the cathedral. And in every parish, the day patron saint and the day of the consecration of the church, if it's consecrated. And then there are other particular feasts. You'll find this more in Europe, where there are a lot of like local saints. Here in the United States, we have St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, for instance. We have the North American martyrs. Those are particular calendars. So I'd like to read from this supporting decree. In preparing or revising the historical lessons of feasts of whatever class, the following should be observed. Commonplace should be avoided. False or inappropriate passages should be deleted or corrected. If historical data be entirely or almost entirely lacking, lessons from the common should be assigned, or some other more appropriate text from the Fathers should be chosen. And historical truth should be attended to not only in the lessons, but also in the antiphons, responsories, hymns, and other parts of the office. This is modernism. Modernism says error has crept in. Or in fact, it might have been there from the beginning. These are not, this is historical criticism. We got to criticize everything. These fancy things of miracles and things like that, that's where they're getting at. False or inappropriate passages should be deleted or corrected. Remember a few saints bought the dust in the conciliar church, like St. Christopher. They're saying we don't know he existed. Well, why should I believe them? I've got centuries that the church tells me he did exist. And let's take a look at what this type of thinking did to the universal calendar of the church. Okay. As regards feasts which in virtue of number 8 of the changes in the Roman Breviary and Missal in accordance with the rubrical code have been expunged from the universal calendar, the following more specific provisions are made for particular calendars. The feast of St. Anacletus, on whatever ground and in whatever grade it is celebrated, is transferred to April 26th under its right name, St. Cletus. The feast of St. Vitalis is transferred to November 4th, together with St. Agricola. Okay. The feast of the Chair of St. Peter is to be celebrated only on February 22nd. I'm going to come back on that one. Okay. The Feast of the Finding of the Holy Cross from May 3rd to September 14th. Okay, they're eliminating one of the Feasts of the Holy Cross. Feast of St. John before the Latin Gate from May 6th to December 27th, eliminating one feast. These are useless repetitions, which is modernist. Read the encyclical Pascendi. The Feast of the Apparition of St. Michael from May 8th to September 29th, again removing a, quote, useless repetition. The Feast of St. Peter and changed from August 1st to June 29th, which is the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul. The Feast of Finding St. Stephen from August 3rd to December 26th, again removing a, quote, useless repetition. What this doesn't say is that the Feast of the Seven Sorrows of the Blessed Virgin during Lent became an optional thing. Do it or no. I ran into a traditionalist priest who said, I've never celebrated this feast before. And I looked up, oh wow, I see why. Let's return. The Feast of the Chair of St. Peter is to be celebrated only on February 22nd. If you look in your Breviary or Missal, pre-60, you go to January 18th, which just happens to be, okay, that's February 22nd, the Chair of St. Peter at Antioch. All right. I'm going to move back here to, no, this one won't have January 18th. Sorry, wrong breviary. I can go to the calendar in the front. I already know what's there. Okay. January 18th, the Chair of St. Peter at Rome. So now they have one Chair of St. Peter, the one at Antioch, but they only call it the Chair of St. Peter. So what are they trying to tell us? When I first meditated on this, I said, what they're trying to tell us is we're not really Pope. We're eliminating the celebration of the Feast of St. Peter's Chair at Rome and moving it over to the Feast of his Chair at Antioch. We'll remove the at Antioch, but it's what's implied. But now we got the question between 55 and St. Pius X. I mean, some might argue, well, we take saint over a non-saint. Well, that's not how law works. As far as lawgivers, they're equivalent. And for sedevacantist, they must accept the 55 calendar revision. Yes, I know. They reduce semi-double feasts to simples, simples to commemorations. Okay, and they eliminate the rank of semi-double with the exception of Sundays, which are still semi-doubles, but under the St. Pius X revision, they retain basically the same place they had under St. Pius X. So we have a reduction in feasts. After the Council of Trent, they did clean the calendar up because there are a lot of feasts in there of saints that people just don't observe anymore. The other one is the elimination of octaves. And the reason given in the decree is that octaves are no longer celebrated by the people. And that's true. Let's take a look at the octaves. The three majors that were retained, Easter, Pentecost, and Christmas, or the Nativity. The 2 days after each, in other words, Monday and Tuesday after Easter and Pentecost, and the 2 days after Christmas were all originally holy days of obligation, major ones. In other words, things shut down for 3 days. And given Lent, things have been shut down for dang near a week before they opened up on Wednesday after Easter. And the celebration of an octave took place not just in church, although the churches were filled as well. It took place in the community. Well, we have octaves of the Assumption, the Ascension, All Saints, Immaculate Conception, other Sacred Heart, Corpus Christi throughout the year, which the people just no longer observe. So these were eliminated in 55. And then you have, many of the vigils were eliminated. And that's one of the things, because a couple of questions went into Rome, because I think the Vigil of All Saints, liturgically, was eliminated. So the question comes in, well, what about fasting? Well, if the vigil's gone, do we have to fast? Well, yeah, you have to fast yet on the Vigil of All Saints. The vigil, I'm not sure what all vigils, but these were greatly reduced as well. And even if the vigil was taken away, the fasting was retained. And I think the vigils were no longer really observed. If there's no fasting, people didn't observe them. There was no connection with the church from people. And that, I think, is where the problem lies. I don't think the 1955 revision of the calendar really addresses that properly. Sedevacantist are not allowed to judge the law. If you believe Pius XII is Pope, you've got to accept 55. If you don't like it, then maybe you should appeal to the Pope, because that is the only person who can make a revision. As for myself, I use this pre-45 Breviary with the old Psalter, which we'll discuss later on, and the vigils, the Octaves. I observe it all. Is there a need for a revision of the calendar? That might be possible. I'm going to leave that for one of my successors to deal with. Okay? But as I observed in the first video, you must be consistent. And so I'm going to talk to you, those of you who believe John XXIII is Pope. You go to the Endald or to the Society of St. Pius X. Of course, the Society of St. Pius X's position is inconsistent in and of itself, unless Fillet makes a deal with Francis. Then it will finally be consistent. But you're living in inconsistency until that deal. But if you accept John XXIII as Pope, you're accepting the principles behind the revision of the calendar in 1960. The calendar itself, appears okay until you look at why they eliminated these feasts. And that's what's wrong. It's the modernist thinking that was behind the elimination of those feasts. And so it's time for you to really actually reconsider your position. Would a true Pope allow a modernist revision? Something that's so obviously modernist, where I can quote from the very decree that's modernist. And so I would ask you to reconsider your position. For those of you who reject John XXIII and his successors, I would ask you to reconsider your position. Is it consistent? If you're a sedevacantist, you have no right to judge the law. Many do. I understand CMRI doesn't. And I believe we should recognize where people are being consistent, as well as point out when they're being inconsistent. Because the matter here, the questions were, what do I do in regard to liturgy? And it's an important question. But the question should also be, we should always be presenting the truth. Now, as Pope, I have made some judgments, leaving things open, as you'll see throughout these videos, because I think it is time for some consideration. I understand the influences in the 40s and 50s in the liturgical movement. And I understand the arguments. I've read the arguments. They're not allowed to judge the law, but they do bring up good points. I've read Father Chicotta's articles on the subject. He brings up good points. And in my own consideration, I'm considering his points. Because we shouldn't just sit here and say, nothing can ever change. Or, everything ought to change to conform to the times. No, we need to make prudent decisions. The church, though, moves slowly. And in the restoration, we need to move slowly and carefully, because we want to consider the reasons. We reject 60. 1, because John XXIII wasn't Pope. 2, because it's based upon modernist principles. That's simple. When we come between pre and post 55, as we move forward, you'll see why I think some things shouldn't change and some things might change. I personally use the pre-55 everywhere, because I do believe in the arguments. There are a few things I think the post 55 might be considered, or some other thing, but we need to be careful. And so what we're discussing here are the changes in the calendar. I use the pre-55. The post-55 was promulgated by a pope and perfectly acceptable. And so if someone wishes to join with us, when we get bishops and pastors and things, we can sit down and discuss, all right, we do need to make a decision, because we do need a consistent universal calendar for the church. But I want to move slow and carefully on this. With that, I'll say God bless you.